You're listening to Jesus and a Cup of Joe, the podcast where faith gets real, truth stands tall, and every conversation begins with Jesus. Hosted by Royce Bottoms, a veteran, minister, and everyday believer. This is where we dive deep into the Word, face life's challenges head on, and keep Christ at the center of it all. So grab your favorite cup of Joe, settle in, and let's walk this journey together. One step, one scripture, one story at a time.
Welcome back to Jesus and a Cup of Joe. Glad you're able to join me. I hope and pray you guys are having a fantastic day. Get you a great cup of Joe and let's get ready to go. So we're going to continue on with our book series that I've written, where I've been trying to share chapters with you guys through the podcast. And so today I'm combining chapter 6 and 7. This is talking about Spinelli Barracks in Germany, and this is also talking about going to Fort Campbell, Kentucky. All right. So we're going to look at the different places, and the reason I'm putting them together is for the sake of time to bring them all together, okay? So see, there's moments in life where you realize you're being prepared for something, just like I was, all right? You think you're being moved, you think that the Army's going to shift you, but see, I left Coleman Army Airfield to go to Spinelli Barracks, still in Mannheim, but just on opposite sides of the city. And so I was used to doing aviation refueling. I was doing the flight lines. I had a rhythm there. I had the helicopter operations. I had my confidence. I had trust. I was really set and comfortable until the day came that I got orders from my sergeant. And it was saying I was being reassigned to Spinelli Barracks. Now, see, Spinelli Barracks was, like I said, on the other side of Mannheim. It was a transportation company area. It had fuel. It had everything that you can think of under the sun. Okay. So we did bulk fuel logistics. We did different type of operations of moving fuel up and down the roads. But I was being stationed at a tank farm, which was ironically right across the street from Coleman Army Airfield. But this tank farm would deal with pretty much tractor trailers, tankers going up and down the highways. We did supply fuel to the aviation side because we had the JP4 and the JP8 fuels for aircrafts. But pretty much we carried MoGas, which is your standard unleaded gasoline, diesel fuel, and we carried some kerosene. But now, if you can imagine, we had six tanks on the farm. Millions of gallons of fuel was held in each. And we had pipelines that ran like arteries. They were everywhere. We had catwalks that were wrapped around these tanks that would connect all the tanks. We had constant machines and pumps running and railroad tracks that came straight into the fuel yard. And so we had fuel trains that would come in daily and offload their fuel to us because they would draw their fuel from the ports, depending on where the fuel's coming from. Sometimes it came from a port and they would rail it, put it on a rail system and send it to us. And so the first time I had a train roll in, I remember it was quite an adventure. Honestly, you could hear it before you could see this train. And so the brakes were coming in screaming and the train was coming in and, it's metal against metal. And I'm sitting here looking at this gigantic piece of equipment coming in to us. And it was the first time I ever did rail operations. Yes, they taught us that at Fort Lee when I went to AIT school. But this was the first time we were actually going to do tank rail operations, which there's a dome cap at the top where you have to open it up, double check the fuel, sample it, make sure it's not contaminated and all of this before you offload it into the tanks. And so I'm going to go into a little bit more detail, which I don't really cover in the book, but I want you guys as listeners to have a good understanding. All right. So if you can picture a rail car, so at the very top of the rail car, dead center is a dome, and inside the dome there's multiple valves and a hatch that would take you inside the tank if you needed to. And down at the bottom you had your lines that came out, your valves that you would connect to. And so one of the first things you had to do when the rail car came in is climb up on top, open up the dome, and we had some special chemicals that we used that we could test the fuel, send it to our lab, which was there at the tank farm, so they could look at it, analyze it, make sure it was good fuel, wasn't contaminated. And then we would make sure that it had a X amount of water or sediment in it. If it came back higher concentration than normal, we would reject the shipment. But once it was all good, we connect the hoses up and we would start offloading, as they called it, into the different fuel tanks. Now, you also had to keep in mind your tank that you're putting this in. You had to have a crew up on top watching the top of the tank to make sure you didn't have an overflow or a spillage. And so it was very important, especially on the jet fuel side, because if something was contaminated, you're not going to ship this out to any aircrafts, because there's a good chance you're going to bring that aircraft down, and you just did not want that responsibility on you. You know what I'm saying? So we were constantly sampling our rail cars. We were testing for water. We were checking for contamination. We were inspecting the seals, grounding our lines, opening the valves, monitoring the transfer. We were doing all of this. This was daily. All right. You would work basically from about 8 o'clock to about 5 o'clock every day. And sometimes you had to do the night shift because you may have trains coming in, or if they had a operation going on where we were having to send out trucks, because we also had 915 military tractors, rigs with 3,000 gallon trailers. And I had one assigned to me. And there would be times where we would get orders that, hey, we had to take several of these tankers and do long road trips, because you may have to go to Kaiserslautern in Germany, which is an hour away, or you may have to go 2 or 3 hours away to a unit to supply them with fuel. So there was daytime and nighttime operations. We never closed. We always had operations going on, but it depended on if you were day shift or night shift, and sometimes it kind of went in between. Now, I will tell you, German weather and winters made these operations harder. All right. Especially when you're climbing up these ladders to these tankers on the tank farm. All right. Ice on the ladders, snow on the catwalks, these steel surfaces freezing through your gloves. Every breath that you take was just like constantly turning to ice because of just the coldness. But see, operations never paused, all right? Responsibilities did not stop because of the discomfort. Now, we called it our shed. It was our office that was I would say you call it a 3-room type wood structure that had a heater system in it. It had several desks for office space, and it had a couple of couches for relaxation and a refrigerator. Because when you're working, when every chance you got, you went and grabbed something to drink, take a break, and you're back at it again. But now the non-commissioned officers, the sergeants at Spinelli, they were quite different as professionals. See, they didn't care about badges and PT scores as much. They cared about, can they trust you doing your job? All right. Military does care about PT. I will say this, you got to maintain that you're physically fit. But it wasn't one of these things where they were so worried about your PT scores of, oh, well, you got to make 280 out of 300 on your PT test to be a part of this unit. No, it was, can I trust you to do the job? And can you do the job without killing yourself or killing others? That's what it was about. So like I said, we dealt with rail cars, things of this nature. But if you didn't have to work the night shift back in your barracks, it was business as usual, just like it was at Coleman. We had cookouts. We all lived in our own barracks. We did our own things. Spinelli was a little different than Coleman because we didn't have the bowling alleys. We didn't have all of that, but we had the additional places to eat and things of this nature. And we had my all-time favorite. We had a vendor that would come onto the post all the time and do the schnitzel and pommes frites. So that was fantastic. But see, during all of this is what I'm going to tell you. During all of this, I knew that something was going on. All right. God was always present. And I believe that God was shaping me. And as much as I would go on about my daily life, I knew there was always something else going on. Because see, at Spinelli, I was there for a year. I learned a lot. I grew a lot more than what I did anywhere else. But the 2 years in Germany was preparing me for what was coming next in my life. But see, I never understood this. I never could recognize this at the time. Now, I will say this: there was nights in the barracks where I would sit and watch TV, have a few beers, kick back, and I would relax some. But there was always something where I was longing for something. There was something that was missing in my life, and I couldn't quite put my finger on it at that particular time. Remember, I'm a young 20-some-year-old in Germany. You know, I'm having the time of my life. I'm serving my country. I'm living overseas. I got money in my pocket. Life is great, but things were missing, right? So now transition comes, transition goes. New orders come and things of this nature. And then the orders arrive, right? 2 years is up pretty quick. Now, we'll say this. Out of 2 years in Germany, I was able to go pretty much all around Europe, seeing different things. And one of the things I think I shared the last episode, but I'll make sure I share it again, is I had the pleasure during this time of being there during the 50th anniversary of D-Day. So I got, as a historical person, I loved to go through and look at all the historical facts and places of World War II. But keep that in the back of your mind, historical person about loving World War II, because the time was coming to have new orders. And these orders was going to move me again. And so I drew an assignment. At first, I was going to Fort Hood, Texas. I'll never forget it. We went to receive our orders because there's an office that you go to, and I drew Fort Hood, Texas. And I was going to be a part of the armor and cav units. And it was kind of funny. There was a guy who was sitting beside me who drew Fort Campbell. And see, he was from Texas. I'm from Georgia. And so we started talking, and we talked the Army into swapping our orders. Because I said, look, this guy's from Texas. He would be better off going to Fort Hood than me. I'm from Georgia. Fort Campbell, Kentucky's pretty close to the house. It would be great for me. And they were able to swap it because we both had the same MOS, the same job. So we're able to swap. So I had orders. They cut me new orders, right? They cut me new orders going to Fort Campbell, Kentucky, home of the 101st Airborne Air Assault Division. And I was going to respond and report to the 426th Brigade Support Battalion. And now I'll say this about Fort Campbell. You see things in Germany. You're a part of units that does things in Europe, and you may get deployed, which I did some deployments over there. But like I said, I don't talk about them in my book, nor am I going to talk about them on the podcast. But when you draw somewhere like Fort Campbell or the 82nd Airborne or something of this nature, you just stepped it up a notch, because they were known as the taskmasters. This battalion was one of the heartbeats of Fort Campbell. And when you hit the ground there, it was time to go to work, okay? Fuel was still a part of the mission, but the sustainment was a new system. It was maintenance, logistics, supply, transportation, fuel distribution, medical units, brigades that moved constantly, all right? we were a part of the brigade that moved. And what we would do is it would not be uncommon to be put on alert for whatever mission was coming down the pipe. Now, I never shared this in the book, but I share it with you guys. When I got to Fort Campbell, first I got to come home. It was the first time I was home in a long time. So I got to come home for a couple of days before reporting. But when I drove up to Fort Campbell, went through Gate 4, which was the main gate at that particular time of Fort Campbell. And I drove to where they told me the company was that I was supposed to report to. And it wasn't the 426 at first. It was a different battalion. And so I got there and I got out of my truck, had my duffel bag, had all my stuff, and I walked in and I went to go report as normal, which is you walk in, you typically go and see the first sergeant who runs the company, and you report. Well, at that particular time when I walked in to report, they said, okay, pretty much drop your stuff here, go down and see the armor sergeant and the supply sergeant, draw your combat gear, get on this bus and let's go. I mean, brand new. Wasn't even there a couple hours. And here I am being bussed to one of the aviation flight lines to get on a plane. I'm getting on a C-130. And now, like I said, none of this is in my book, but I'm sharing this with you guys because as you listen to the podcast, I believe you should get a little bit more than the people that read the book. So remember, I went to airborne school. So I get on the C-130 and I'm sitting down and I'm looking up underneath this cargo net seat, because there's not seats like you would think in a normal aircraft. And I remember somebody said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm looking for the parachute." They said, "Why?" I said, "Because I'm airborne. I've never stepped off of a C-130. I've always jumped off of a C-130. And they said, "Well, not today. You're part of the 101st now." Next thing I know it, we're up in the air and we're flying, and here I am brand new. And I'm asking the questions of where are we going? What are we doing? What's up? Is this a training mission? Come to find out, we were heading to Haiti. This was during the time of some uprising in Haiti. Well, I believe we got somewhere over Florida where they canceled us and they turned the aircraft around and we went back to Fort Campbell and we landed and they took us back to the company. And so when we got to the company, they started asking me for my orders and I handed them my paperwork and all of this, still had the rest of my gear sitting there where I left it. And they said, "Oh man, no, you don't belong to us. You belong to the 426 right down the road." So I had to drop everything, grab everything, take off running, and I report to the 426, and they're like, "Hey, man, where have you been? You're AWOL." And so luckily, I had the two companies able to talk to each other and work it all out. But yeah, got deployed my very first couple of hours on Fort Campbell. What an experience. But once we got it all settled, I reported to the 426 Alpha Company, 426 Support Battalion, which, like I said, we dealt with fuel and supply lines. All right. So Fort Campbell was all about dealing with operational things. Okay. Fort Campbell could be called up in any moment and then your whole world would shift. All right. There was times where I was a fuel specialist, but there was times where I was a part of a war fighting sustainment system. And what I mean by that is you were constantly being put on alert all the time for variety of things. Now, understand this. One of the things about Fort Campbell that most people don't understand is air assault is not a suggestion. It is something that's expected. An air assault school is 10 plus days, and then you have to do a 12-mile road march, I think, within 3 hours. And this is teaching you how to tie your own seat to rappelling out of helicopters, how to do sling load operations, in other words, sling load trucks to where you connect them to CH-47 Chinooks and they can transfer this equipment around. It's everything compressed and compact. Airborne school was 3 weeks. Air assault's 10 days. But it's 10 days, honestly, of pure hell. And it's something that you have to be mentally ready for. Because when you get to Fort Campbell, if you do not make it to airborne school, they're going to get rid of you off of Fort Campbell because they want everybody air assault certified to be ready to go. And it's fun. I've jumped out of airplanes, but it's fun rappelling out of helicopters. I don't know what it is. Now my body today is all tore up. But I can tell you, looking back, it was some of the best times I ever had. So that is Spinelli Barracks. That's Fort Campbell. That's where everything was. This is dealing with a lot more responsibility. And see, looking back, I can say this. Spinelli built precision. Fort Campbell built perspective. Spinelli Barracks taught me stewardship, but Fort Campbell taught me the scale of what I was working on. Both were preparing me for something bigger. See, God was shaping me in a way. He was teaching me responsibility, awareness, and leadership. See, long before I stood in a church, long before I put on different uniforms, before I had different titles depending on my job, God was working on me. God was working on me. So when we look at Luke 16:10, it says, "He who is faithful in what is least is faithful also in much." See, Spinelli was least, Fort Campbell was much, and they both mattered. They both mattered. So as I get ready to wrap up, I'm going to close this with a prayer, and I'll share a few things with you toward the end. Father, I thank you for every assignment that shapes us. Father, I thank you for the responsibility that prepares us for greater missions, to teach us stewardship in small places, to teach us to be patient and wait upon you. As we know that you're constantly preparing us for the next journey in our life, Lord, I pray if there's one listening, Father, who is not fully aware or understanding what it is that you're preparing them for, Lord, I pray that with your guiding hand, you will guide them and show them and help get them to the next level of their life. For all this, we ask in your precious name. Amen. All right. Well, thank y'all so much. First and foremost, thank you so much. If you've had an opportunity to read the book, it is on Apple Bookstore. It is free. I encourage all of y'all to take a read. Tell me what you think. It's the first time I ever wrote a book. So, that's why I've decided to break it down into a podcast to share with all of you guys. For those who really doesn't want to read books, don't blame you. But this is chapter 6 and 7. And then, like I said, I'm wanting to condense some of these chapters because there are 22 chapters in the book. There are some other episodes that I'm working on for teaching purposes coming up soon. But once again, thank all of y'all for listening and to supporting this podcast and this ministry. If it wasn't for listeners like you, I wouldn't be able to keep doing what I'm doing. So thank y'all so much for that. So listen, I'm going to get out of here. Hope and pray you guys have a fantastic day. Just remember, you always start your day with Jesus and a cup of Joe. God bless, and I'll catch you next time.